Reverend France Davis, pastor emeritus of Salt Lake City's Calvary Baptist Church, served his congregation as its pastor for over 45 years. In late December 2019, he stepped down. Still active in his congregation, still serving, he remains an influencer for his faith and for Utah's civil rights efforts, and for the state's growing African American community. Davis came to Salt Lake City in 1972 to teach and to attend graduate school at the University of Utah. He was appointed instructor in communications and in ethnic studies, earning a Distinguished Teacher Award from the university. Davis also retired as an adjunct associate professor in 2014. Davis has published several books, including a memoir entitled France Davis, An American Story Told. Among numerous awards and recognitions, he was given an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from the University of Utah in 1993, Salt Lake Community College in 1997, Dixie State College in 2002, an official citation from the Utah House of Representatives in recognition of his outstanding service to Utah in 2006, and he also received the FBI Director's Community Leadership Award in 2014, and that was awarded to him in Washington, D.C. In October of 2022, the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah created a digital archive in his name to house digital oral histories, photographs, community records, personal documents, and other materials from Utah's Black community, both present and past. Reverend Davis lives in Salt Lake City with his wife and is the father of 3 children, 4 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. We'd like to take this time to welcome Reverend Davis.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you.
Good afternoon.
Surely it's a better afternoon than that. Good afternoon or good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
Thank you. Listen, about the worst possible thing you could do at my dad's house would be if my dad spoke to you and you did not return the greeting. If he said good morning to you and you did not say good morning, certain parts of your anatomy would be tenderized. I'm delighted to be here. My wife tried to talk me into not coming when we heard the weather report and saw the news, and she said to me, surely you can't see well enough to drive all the way over there by yourself, so you better stay home or have somebody drive you. And so I told her I could drive myself, and I've been here for the last couple of hours getting around. I've been to the Library on Gentile, I've been to the hospital, I've been to the nursing homes, I've been all over the place trying to get here. Delighted to be here though, and pleased that you have come. And what I'd like to do is I'd spend a little time and talk to you about my experiences with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and here in the state of Utah. And then spend some time commenting, answering questions that you may want to raise. And then lastly, perhaps spend a little bit of time just talking with you in general. Does that sound fair to everybody? Yes. Great. To start with, let me remind you that I was born about 100 miles from where Martin Luther King Jr. was born. Martin Luther King Jr. was born and reared in Atlanta, Georgia. I was born and reared just outside of Augusta, Georgia. Anybody know where Augusta is? There are a few of you who do. You must be the people who go to the golf tournaments, and I refuse to go home anymore in April because everybody is there. It's like Salt Lake was last weekend with all of the 100,000 people that we gathered there, and that's the way Augusta is in the month of April. But anyway, I was born during those days, and during those days, it was separate but equal. Separate but equal. Anybody know what I mean by separate but equal? In fact, what they had was schools that were for people who were white over on that side of town, and people who were colored on the other side of town. And by the way, there were only two groups of people who lived in America during those days. Either you were light-skinned enough to be considered white only, or you were dark-skinned enough to be considered colored. And so if you were Native American, or if you were Hispanics, very few Hispanics back in those days were in the United States, except in Texas and in California. But very few were anywhere else that was around. And so I was born during those days and went to those all African American schools. Everybody at my school, except once a year, one day for about an hour, there was a man that would show up who was not African American. Anybody want to guess at who that man's or what his position might have been? Did I see a hand?
Maybe the principal of the school?
Not the principal. The principal was African American.
Was it Jimmy Carter?
Not Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter lived about 150 miles south of where I grew up. And by the way, I want you to pray for Jimmy Carter. He was our president of our United States of America and is today getting hospice attention because he is ill and they don't expect that he's going to live more than another 6 months. Hospice means that you're going to live about 6 months, by the way. Well, anyway, the superintendent once a year would show up and would take a look at our school once a year. And everybody else at my school, the superintendent, not the superintendent, the principal, the teachers, the cooks, the janitors, the bus drivers, everybody at my school was African American and looked like me. I then went to college at a little place called Tuskegee. Anybody heard of it? I know Dean's been, Dean is a graduate of, you a graduate of Tuskegee?
I am.
What did you graduate in?
Aerospace engineering.
Aerospace engineering. I majored in agricultural engineering when I was at Tuskegee. But because I was busy marching with Dr. Martin Luther King, at the end of one of the years I was there, I got a nice letter from the dean. Dear Mr. Davis, thank you for coming. You had great potential, but next year, don't bother to come back. And don't bother. So they kicked me out of school. And when you got kicked out of school and you look like me, you also guaranteed to get a second letter. Where would that letter come from? Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam wrote me and invited me to join the Army or the Marines. And I didn't want to be on the ground because I knew they were going to send all of us to Vietnam, and I didn't want to be on the ground during those days. And so I went down to the Air Force recruiter and made a deal with the Air Force recruiter that if he would take me in the Air Force, he could take me that day, and I would go, and by midnight that very night, I was already in San Antonio, Texas, in the Air Force. Well, I grew up that way, and then went to school. After I got out of the military, I decided that maybe education was the key for an African American to be able to get ahead. And so I enrolled in college. Anybody good at math? Okay. How about you, young man? You want to be my mathematician for a minute?
Okay.
You good at math?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I enrolled in one college and took 15 hours a day. How many hours was I taking at that college?
15 hours a day, so
15 hours. I was taking 15 hours. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Another college, Monday and Wednesday night, I took 15 hours. Now how many hours am I taking?
30.
30. And then I enrolled in another college on Tuesday and Thursday and took 15 hours. How many?
45.
45. And Tuesday and Thursday night I didn't have anything to do, and so I enrolled in a fourth college and took 15 hours. And there was a girl that wanted me to take her to the movies on Friday night, and I didn't want to take her. So I enrolled in another college on Friday night and Saturday and took 15 hours. How many?
75.
75 hours. And the professor, Rick Reiki, at the University of Utah, read about a crazy UC Berkeley student. UC Berkeley is a lightweight school that you can go to in case you can't get in any place else. So I was going to UC Berkeley. So he read about this crazy UC Berkeley student taking 75 hours of college credit per semester, and he called me in the middle of the day. Nobody called me in the middle of the day. You didn't have cell phones those days. You had a phone you had to pick up, or you had one of those big long ones about this size that you carried. They call it a brick. And that's about all you had. So he called me in the middle of the day and offered me a job at the University of Utah, and I asked him how much money was in the job, and he told me, and I said, oh, I'd be glad to take that job with that kind of money. And I came to Utah because of the amount of money that they were offering me in 1972. 1972, when I got here, I showed up. I had an apartment already paid a deposit on. I had a telephone already installed. I had already given my family and friends the name of the apartment and the telephone number, only to show up, and the landlord said, not here, not here. And he wouldn't allow me to move in. But he and I had a fight then, because Vice President Boyer Jarvis of the University of Utah and I took him on in court, and he agreed to offer me any one of his 100 or so apartments before I was done, and of course I turned them all down. I lived for the first year in a place called International House at the University of Utah, and for the whole year, that's where I lived. And the International House was a one-room situation. I ate cornflakes in the morning, I ate a chuckarama in the middle of the afternoon, and that was about $1.50 that I spent a day in terms of eating while I was at the university. Next year, of course, I got married, and we moved into the student housing, and later became pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church, and we moved to where we currently live, 1912 Meadow Drive. Well, I've lived in Utah for 50 years now. 50 years, almost as long as Stuart's been alive. He's a little older than 50 years, but almost as old as he is. But I've lived in Utah for these many years, and my job has been to teach at the university, to pastor the Calvary Baptist Church, and to direct the affairs of people in the community to bring about a beloved community where all of us could live, and all of us could get along, and all of us could be treated the same under the laws of the state of Utah. And that's what Martin Luther King was all about. Martin Luther King was not about helping blacks to be treated different or better than other folk or whites or anybody else, but rather his mission was to ensure that everybody was treated the same under the laws of the land. And there were laws in the United States of America, still are laws, and those laws were designed for all of us to be treated the same under the law. My first major task was ensuring that African Americans and other people of color could live anywhere that they could afford to live. Could live anywhere that they could afford to live. And that was not true when I showed up. But shortly thereafter, when we took on the landlord and took him to court and had him agree to a few stipulations, we agreed then that people could live, and we finally got a fair housing bill passed by the Utah State Legislature. Anybody here in the legislature? Nobody's in the legislature today. They're still meeting, I guess, trying to figure out what to do about taxes on food. I hope they'll drop it. But anyway, my first task was fair housing, and I ensured and made sure that everybody in the state of Utah had an opportunity wherever they could afford to live to be able to live there. There were a few African Americans living in the Ogden, Davis County area. There were a few living in Salt Lake area. There were a few living down in Price Helper area. And anybody know why African Americans would possibly live in Helper, Utah?
Mining.
Mining. That was one of the reasons, but that was the second reason.
The railroad?
The railroad. The railroad was there and the mining was being done, and because the mining was being done, they needed to get the ore from the mine up the mountain, and they needed to add an helper engine, and that's why Helper, Utah is called Helper. And African Americans were brought from Mississippi, Louisiana, and places like that to Utah to live, and they lived here and helped to add that helper car. Well, those were the three main places that African Americans were living. In Ogden, they were living here because of 25th Street, because of the railroad, because of the depots, and because of Hill Air Force Base. In Salt Lake City, a majority of those were there because of business opportunities, jobs, education, and various other reasons that they were living in Utah. But African Americans were living in those places, and yet in Ogden in particular, they could not buy a house that was west of Washington Boulevard. In Salt Lake City, they couldn't buy a house that was east of Foothill Boulevard. So there were places that African Americans could not live. But we were able to get a fair housing bill passed by the Utah State Legislature, and that legislative body then instituted the fair housing for Utah. The second thing, yes.
What year was that?
1972, 73, and 74. Were you born then?
79.
You were just a baby back in those years. But anyway, yes. But in the 70s, we're talking. In addition to that, in addition to the fair housing bill, we took on the MX missile, which Jimmy Carter was one of the presidents that was in favor of it. But Ed Firmage and I took on the MX missile and decided that that was not a weapon system that we would like to have to use in wars here in the United States or wherever else wars were going on. We took on the MX missile and were able to get the MX missile strapped. It went away, it disappeared because we were fighting it from the state of Utah. Ed Firmage was a professor of law and I was a professor of communications, and the two of us were the leaders of that particular movement during the late 70s, early 1980s. Later on, Congress passed a wonderful holiday, the third Monday in January, as a legal public holiday. But Utah, along with 6 other states, decided that whatever the federal law was, it didn't apply to them. And so we had to get a separate bill introduced into the state legislature, and that separate bill would declare the third Monday in January as a legal public holiday called Martin Luther King holiday. The first year the bill went down, nobody voted for it but the sponsors, in essence, but nobody voted for it. And then the next year, I spent the year traveling statewide, visiting all of the legislators and reminding them that what Martin Luther King Jr. did was not just for African Americans, but rather was for all people. The legislators were arguing that Martin Luther King never came to Utah. Anybody know whether that's true or not?
He did.
He did come here. He did. He's on the front page of the newspaper, the Salt Lake Tribune newspaper. He's on the front page, and he got left because he got left in Denver, Colorado, when he got off the airplane to make a phone call. And Dr. J.D. Williams, who was a professor of politics, held the audience for 2.5 hours while Martin Luther King chartered an airplane in order to come to Utah. So they were arguing that he never came here, and so I had to go and inform them that he did come here. They were arguing that he was a drunken and a womanizer. The FBI, there's a wonderful little book out entitled FBI and Martin Luther King, and you ought to read it. Go to the library here, and if they don't have it, ask them to get it. The FBI and Martin Luther King, because the FBI cooked up the notion that Martin Luther King was a drunken and that he was a womanizer. They would hear a grunt. Martin Luther King would go to Birmingham, Alabama, and the FBI would check into the room next to him, and when they'd hear a grunt in the room, they would then say, oh, he's drunk or he's got a woman in it. But he was not a womanizer, nor was he a drunk. And finally, Mrs. King and her children all came to Utah and all visited my home. And during that time, they were able, the Utah State Legislature passed a law declaring that the third Monday in January was a legal public holiday, but it was Human Rights Day. Third Monday in January, Human Rights Day. Anything wrong with that? What's wrong with it?
You're erasing the man who was pivotal in getting human rights equalized.
You're erasing the man. What else is wrong with it?
What are human rights?
We already have a Human Rights Day in December. So now we had 2 Human Rights Days, one in December and one in January. Finally, the legislature decided that they would change that so that now you and I, even the legislature itself, does not meet on the third Monday in January, because it is a legal public holiday. Well, we got that done successfully, and all of the states except there are 2 states that remain today, I'm told, without a Martin Luther King holiday, but all of the others have it. We have a street in Ogden, one in Salt Lake named Martin Luther King Jr. We have a Rosa Parks street in Salt Lake City. In fact, if you go off on 6 South into downtown Salt Lake, you go off on Martin Luther King Boulevard, and it is the main street. It also has the place where Mignon Richmond's park is. Anybody know who Mignon Richmond was or is? Mignon Richmond was the first African American to graduate from college in the state of Utah. Graduated from Logan, but was never able to get a job in the area in which she graduated. Mignon Richmond. Her niece just recently died, and I and Reverend Mapp from Atlanta, Georgia, did her funeral. Well, anyway, Martin Luther King Jr. has been significant. He taught us a number of things, and I'd like to list 5 or 6 of the main lessons that you and I would do well to learn from Martin Luther King Jr. Number 1, learn that you need to prepare as if everything depends upon you. Prepare as if everything depends upon you. Martin Luther King was the best reader in the 1st grade class at 5 years old. He was prepared. He graduated from high school at 15 years old and graduated from his first college at 18 years, 4-year college at 18 years old, and had earned the highest degree that you can earn, called a PhD. He earned it at 25 years old. He prepared as if everything depended upon him. The second lesson that he taught us, that you and I would do well to learn today, is that you need to wait until the ground swells. Wait until people are ready for the change. Wait until they are ready to follow wherever you are leading. Wait until the ground swells. Martin Luther King didn't do anything at all until he went to Alabama. He had graduated with a PhD from college, Boston University, and now he went to Alabama, and when he got to Alabama, was drafted along with Ralph Abernathy to become the leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association. As leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association, Mrs. Rosa Parks had gotten on the bus and refused to give up her seat because of her skin color, but Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy waited until the ground swelled, and as people got ready in Montgomery, Alabama, they then were able to bring about the changes and literally drove the bus system of Montgomery, Alabama bankrupt, and they have not fully recovered until this day. The third thing that Martin Luther King taught us is to visualize. That's what his speech, "I Have a Dream," was all about. I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So Martin Luther King was a visual. He could see what was not seen. He could see what was not yet possible. He could see what was going to happen sooner or later, and he taught us to visualize. Fourth, Martin Luther King taught us to learn how to communicate. Learn how to communicate. Learn how to tell stories. Learn how to sing songs. Learn how to talk the language of other people. I went to court the other day. I go to court probably as much as any lawyer does here in this area. But I went to court the other day, and the judge was trying a case of illegal drugs from a Hispanic young fella that had been caught down at 70th South and East and 250 and 15. He had been caught in that area. And the judge couldn't even remember the young man's name and couldn't pronounce it. But you know, my sisters and my brothers, you and I need to learn how to communicate across lines, across races, across people, across languages. Learn to communicate, and that is, learn to tell the stories and to sing the songs that others sing. African Americans sang the old Negro spirituals. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. And that was not just a song about swinging low, sweet chariot coming for to carry me home, but it was about how to get out of slavery, how to get free. And then they would sing, steal away, steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. Harriet Tubman taught us how to really sing that song. And it's about how to get out of your situation and to change your circumstances and get someplace else. So communicate. Then Martin Luther King had a servant attitude. How many of you are aware that everything that Martin Luther King Jr. did, he did it for other people? He didn't ride the bus because he had to. His dad had a brand new Cadillac. He didn't sit in a certain section on the train because he had to, but he sat there because that's where other people were. And he believed that everybody ought to be able to sit anywhere that they chose to sit. When I was growing up, by the way, if you were African American, you had to sit in the back of the bus, in the front of the train, in the top of the theater, and the bottom of the boat. And people used to say to us, stay in your place. What place? Is it the back, the front, the top, or the bottom? What place are you talking about? Well, anyway, Martin Luther King taught us that we've got to do what we can to ensure that all of us have a servant attitude. We are in this boat together. I go fishing every now and then down to Utah Lake. Anybody been fishing down there lately? Good catfish, I mean, you know, and they got white bass, and, good fish, good place to go fishing. You ought to go sometime. But anyway, I was down there fishing one day, and off the shore, not far, close enough for me to hear, was a man and his father and his son in on the boat. And the boy stood up and began to point toward his dad's feet and laugh. And his dad told him, stop that laughing now. You're going to scare the fish. And the boy laughed even the more and pointed even the more at his dad's feet. And his dad said, all right, that's it. Roll in your line. Roll in your line. That's all the fishing we're going to do for the day. You scared the fish. And as the boy began to roll his line in, his dad said to him, by the way, what are you laughing and pointing at. And the voice pointing at his dad's feet said, "Your end of the boat is leaking. Your end of the boat is leaking." Well, that was true. His end of the boat was leaking, but the unfortunate part is that if his end of the boat kept on leaking, then so would the other end of the boat. It would soon take on water, and everybody would have a problem, and nobody would be able to survive. My wife just had her left knee replaced. They charged me nearly $200,000 for the surgery that they did. And I asked them, why charge me so much? And they said, because we have so many people that don't have insurance. We're all in this boat together. I live at a house, and in my house, my taxes this year was nearly $4,000. And I asked the city, the county, why are you charging me so much taxes this year? And he said, because there are so many people without a place to stay, homeless. And then I thought about it and was reminded that we're all in the boat together. And unless we work together to bring about positive change and beloved community, we'll all sink. And our boat will take on water. And before we are done, all of us will be in trouble. Thank you for listening. I've talked far too long. Tell me what you'd like to know about. Yes, sir.
After you got non-discrimination passed for housing, how was redlining in Utah?
Redlining in Utah still exists. Still exists. There are certain places that if you go and apply for a loan and your skin color is like mine or like other people that are red or brown or so forth, you're not gonna get a good loan. And if you get a loan, you're not going to get a good interest rate. So it still exists. It's still a problem for African Americans to be able to buy the house that they want without having to pay an extra premium in order to get it. So redlining. I see. Yes.
How much did you make when you worked at the college?
How much did I make when you go? No, I can't tell you that because my colleagues would be, how much did I make when I worked at the college? My colleagues would be mad. They'd be mad if they knew what my paycheck was. So I can't tell you. Yes, sir.
Give us a few sentences on the day Martin Luther King died and what went through your mind.
The day Martin Luther King Jr. died, I was in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand, during those days. So I didn't know that he was dead for several days. But when I found out, it was a sad, sad time. It was like the death of John F. Kennedy. Everybody in here remembers where they were when John Kennedy was shot and killed. Well, the same is true with the death of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Robert Kennedy, all of those people. But those were the saddest days because those people, Peter, Paul, and Mary wrote a song. Why does the good always have to die so young. And that's kind of what we felt. We felt that Martin Luther King, at 39, died far too soon. That John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, all of those people died far too soon.
So what church in Salt Lake are you pastor of?
What church in Salt Lake am I pastor of? I was pastor for 46 years of the Calvary Baptist Church. I'm retired now, so I don't pastor any church anymore. I preach at their church and preach at his church and somebody else's church. I preach all over the place. I'm in this Sunday I'm going to be preaching at Baseline Fellowship in Salt Lake. Next Sunday I'll be preaching at Second Baptist in Ogden. The Sunday after that I'll preach at High Point Church in Heber City. So I'm all over the place.
We have a question online from someone who's on Zoom. It says, if someone is looking to affect further positive change in Utah, where would you suggest that they begin?
Where would I suggest that anybody who's interested in positive change, where do they start? Well, start by getting to know everything that you possibly can about yourself. Not about others, but about yourself. Learn everything you can about yourself, about who you are, where you come from, who your family, what your roots are. And then, after that, introduce yourself to somebody that's different than you and get to know them one-on-one. Stuart and I know each other as individuals, but we know each other not only as pastors of churches and as leaders in the community, but we know each other on a more personal basis. So the first thing is get to know yourself. Secondly, get to know people who are different than you. And what you will discover is that people who are different, their toilets flush the same way as yours, their stoves turn on with the same kind of knobs as yours does, and things are not that much different. Yes.
Reverend Davis, I ride the bus and there's a lot of different people on the bus and we often talk and it's really nice sometimes. And I get frustrated with the politicians that are trying to divide us. And my question is kind of following up on that one. Is there anything more in a bigger way that we can do? Or is that the best way, just one-on-one?
Well, I think that the people who are seeking to divide us are fewest in number, that the majority are those who are remaining silent, and that we've got to learn to speak up. We've got to speak up about racial issues, we've got to speak up about education issues, political issues. Utah is a Republican state, but we've got to do something about the other parties that are possible and get them as involved as we possibly can. So I think that that's what else we can do, is that we need to speak up, and those of us who've been silent for too long.
Thank you.
What is your advice to people of color, especially Black Americans, to maintain perseverance and courage in the face of opposition?
What is my advice to people of color to maintain strength and courage? That's back to my original answer about knowing who you are yourself. Once you know who you are yourself, then nobody can tell you who you are. I came here in 1972 to teach at the university, and the next year they fired my boss because he could not pass tenure. My boss could not pass tenure. 7 years, and then you have to go up for tenure. But my boss couldn't do it. But I stayed for 42 years because I knew who I was. Nobody tells me who I am. Nobody tells me what I can do and what I can't do. I decide who I am and what I can do, and then I take courage and go out and do it. Yes?
Could you tell us a little bit about some of the marches you may have had with Dr. King, please?
First march that I've participated in was the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech. I was just a kid. I was a teenager during those years, but I participated and sat on the sideline, and nobody knew that I was there. The second march that I was in was the march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. That's the Voting Rights March that was held in Alabama so that the citizens of Selma, Alabama, who were paying poll taxes, didn't have to pay poll taxes anymore, could register and vote and could find the registration place. So I participated in the march from Selma to Montgomery. And then the rest of those marches were either in Berkeley or in Salt Lake City, and they were political marches designed to bring about a change in terms of the representation in the political system. We wanted to get more people elected, and we got Wilder, for example, elected as mayor. And we got De'Armond Bailey elected as the attorney for the city of Berkeley. Then we came to Utah, and we got Reverend Robert Harris, and then Reverend Tara Williams and others elected. And unfortunately, today we only have one elected legislature, and that's Sandra Hollins. But we're still working on it.
Yes, on that Selma to Montgomery march, tell me about the sleeping arrangements and how did that work out?
How did the sleeping arrangements work out? 8-9 days of marching, and how did we sleep? We slept in sleeping bags and tents, and we did it during the season of the year that was fairly warm, and so we didn't have to worry about sleeping. Eating was a bigger problem, and safety was a bigger problem. How did we eat? People felt sorry for us and helped us along the way to be able to eat. And standing on one side of us was the Ku Klux Klan with their guns, their rifles and shotguns, and on the other side was the United States' military with their guns and bayonets. And that was the way we were protected. We felt safe because the military, the president had federalized the National Guards men of the local areas, and so we felt safe from the Klan that was on the other side. The last night of our stay, the Catholic Church in Montgomery, Alabama, allowed us to sleep on the grounds. We slept on the grounds of the church, and most of us were outside.
Is there a single civil rights issue that you could identify today that you think is the most important, or one of the most important?
I think that there's three main issues that we need to all be working on today. One is this notion of hatred, this sense that some people are better than other people are, but hatred, we've got to work on that. I just attended a conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, entitled Eradicating Hatred. And they talked about how hatred is such a festering disease nowadays. And that people seem to have permission to say and to do anything toward anybody that's different than them. And so the first is hatred. Second is education. That if people want to get ahead in life, they have to do it by getting as much formal education as they can get, and then get the rest on the job training. And then thirdly is the political economic system to ensure that there are people who represent us, that are elected, and that they speak for us when they get in the office.
Have you considered, now that you're retired, have you considered running for state legislature?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I have not considered. In fact, I have too many skeletons in my closet that I don't want revealed. And no, I'm not interested in running for office or being an elected official. I was on the Board of Regents, and I was chairman of the Board of Corrections for the Utah for a period of time, and in both of those were appointed positions, but neither were elected.
Well, I think it's important to know yourself, but I don't think you know the meaning of the word retirement. But if you could, for me, it would be really helpful if you could maybe take a couple minutes and talk about your personal remembrances of Martin Luther King.
I don't know. My wife and others say that I don't know the meaning of retirement. I am as busy now as I ever have been, probably, and making less money. Don't get paid for it. So you got to work on get me some money. All right. But anyway, so retirement for me is just a changing of from what you have to do to what you want to do. Some ideas about what Martin Luther King was like. First of all, physically, Martin Luther King was not a very attractive person. He had big shoulders, he had a big head, and a small body. But when he opened his mouth, you knew that you were in the presence of greatness. That he was a man who knew so much that he could talk to anybody at any level. He could talk to my dad with his third grade education. He could talk to me with my college degrees, or he could talk to my son who practices medicine. He could talk to anybody at their level and was good at it. Thirdly, he was so well educated, so well formally educated, that Martin Luther King Jr. could cite, and did cite in the letter from the Birmingham jail, did cite other scholars and what they had to say. He quoted them word for word, and he was just a great person. Unfortunately, he didn't do much to take care of his family, though. And that, I think, is his biggest problem from my point of view. His wife had to go out and earn her own keep after he died. He didn't have insurance, he got the Nobel Peace Prize, which was worth several $100,000s, but in a year's time, it was all gone. He'd given it all away. So he didn't leave that for his family to live on. So I think negatively that he didn't do much for his family, and that would be the area that I think more of us ought to concentrate on. Yes.
There's another question from online. What advice and words of encouragement could you give to the Black, Indigenous, and children of color in our area that are currently facing discrimination or racism in their schools?
What advice would I give to children in our schools? Davis County is under federal, the federal government is looking at Davis County currently because of the way that the children have been treated. What advice would I give? First of all, I would give them the advice to learn as much as you can about yourself, but also about other people. Secondly, I would suggest that every child come to a place that they could stand on their own 2 feet and stand up for themselves when others call them names or when others say negative things about them, that you ought to learn how to stand up for yourself. And then thirdly, I would suggest that you join an organization, that children join an organization that they can participate in, and in that organization, whether it be a church or whether it be a civil rights organization or whatever, but join some organization that you can actively participate in and give of yourself.
I'm just starting to leave Mormonism and be Christian, and I had an amazing experience with these students from Fresno State. They built the first evangelical, they were kids, they built the first evangelical church in Centerville, and I got to go to the church for over 2 years. And the clergy said, above everything, love is the most important thing we can show one another. How do you think we can give ourselves self-love, our family, our community, our friends? How do you think we can show them our love?
Martin Luther King Jr. talked about the beloved community, wrote a book entitled Beloved Community. And what he said in that book is that we have to put aside our selfish desires and we have to seek the fulfillment of other people. And that's what I think we have to do as we move from one area to another, is we have to learn to seek the needs and the desires of other people and do those as well as we possibly can. A couple of other questions in the back here.
You said earlier about waiting for the ground to swell.
Yes.
In your estimation, where is the ground swollen right now?
The ground is swelling now around the war in Ukraine. And that's where the ground is swelling, and that's where we've got to do something to be helpful. I think the president and other legislators are dragging their feet in terms of helping those people to be able to win that war. But the ground is swelling, and the more it swells, the more we're going to have to do something to help. That's one place. Another place in our own country is this notion about the hatred of people simply because they are different than us. Different sexually, different in terms of color, difference in terms of where they live. We've got to do something about, Mr. Crump said, it is not the color of the skin anymore, but now it's the color of the uniform. And that's what we've got to do something about. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to stand up because I'm kind of short. I just wondered if you could speak from a pastoral or a preacher's perspective about I think we're being lied to a lot today by our government, by our friends. And what is wrong with lying?
What's wrong with lying? Oh, what's wrong with lying? Well, first of all, thank you. Everything's wrong with it. But the first thing that's wrong with it is that you place yourself in a place that you don't want to be when you lie. And then secondly, you cause other people to think and to believe other than they ought to think and believe because they are lying. There's one of the commandments is thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And we ought never to just intentionally tell a lie. And if you ever tell a lie and you catch yourself, you ought to make amends and do what you can about it. It's been my pleasure to talk with you. I'll be around for a while. What time?
You have another, like, 25, 30 minutes.
I got another 25, 30 minutes. All right, great.
Earlier with the FBI, would it be the one that's called the FBI's War Against Dr. King? Is that the book you referred to?
No, it's called Martin Luther King and the FBI. You got it?
I looked it up on Google, yeah, the title would be.
You can find it on Google.
Yeah.
It's by David Garrow.
I'll put in a request soon. The Davis County Library doesn't currently own it, but
I
I'll put it in.
checked.
As soon as I go back to my desk.
All right, so we get it here at the library so that people can then check it out and read it. Yes.
What's the best platform or website to follow you or be a part of civil rights movements or any?
I'm not on.
Or like be a part of any civil rights?
I'm not on any website. I'm not on any platform.
Well, for civil rights here in Utah, like if we want to follow something and help be a part of change, what would be the best?
I can't answer that. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. Because I'm not on any platform, and I choose to stay away from social media as best I possibly can, and so I'm sorry I can't answer. Yes.
What do you say to someone that says that it's not a racism problem, it's a problem of people being kind? Like, people just need to be kind. It's a kindness problem, not a racist problem.
Well, I think that's partially right, but partially wrong. I think there is a racial problem in our country that we built from the start. Can I do a history lesson for you for a minute? Remember that when we wrote the Constitution so that there were three groups of people. And ever since that day, we've been striving to get them to be equal. There were some people that were considered whole persons, others that were considered as no person, and others that were considered as 3/5 of a person. And we define people in terms of that. Racially, and we looked at their skin color and we decided, and in Louisiana, for example, still to this day, in the Constitution of the state of Louisiana, if you have one drop of black blood in you, you're considered black. One drop, and that's a very small amount of blood. But historically, we've got a kindness problem. We're not kind to one another anymore. We don't love each other. We don't appreciate each other. We don't celebrate the differences that we have. But instead, we use those to point out the negatives about our differences. Does that answer? Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, you believe red just like we.
I do. And remember that bleeding red. Remember that there was a black man who invented the blood bank. Anybody know his name? Black man invented the blood bank, and it is said that he died because they would not give him white blood.
No such thing.
They would not give him blood that a white person had donated. But he had shown that blood is blood. Blood is blood. And, blacks, yes.
A couple more questions from online. Did you ever cross paths with Dr. King's contemporaries such as Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, or James Baldwin? And then second, besides the places you are going to be preaching, are there any other venues where people can come hear you speak coming up soon?
Did I ever cross paths with other famous people is the best way to summarize the question, and I would say yes. I met Malcolm X, I met James Baldwin, Jesse Jackson was in Salt Lake. He's still in Salt Lake today. He leaves Salt Lake today, Tuesday, but he's been in Salt Lake for the last 3 or 4 days. So I've met all of those. One of the values of going to an HBCU college, a college like Tuskegee, Morehouse, Morris Brown, Clark, Spelman, is that you meet all of those icons of African American life. And so I met all of them. Secondly, the question, what was the second
Are you going to be speaking at any other venues?
Where else am I speaking? I'm speaking all over the place. Tomorrow, Stanley, what's the finance company, Stanley?
Morgan Stanley.
Morgan Stanley. You're speaking at Morgan Stanley. Tomorrow I'm speaking to the leadership of the University of Utah. Tomorrow at 3. The day after I'm speaking. I speak every day. I speak every day. And, but again, I'm not on any social media, so you can't track me.
No, I think that
where I am. Yes.
Civil rights group,
Right.
yeah.
What would you say to those people, ignorant I believe, who criticize BLM by saying all lives matter?
Well, I agree that all lives matter. However, some lives have been treated as if they do not matter. And I think until we get to the place that we respect and appreciate everybody, regardless of their difference and regardless of where they come from, we will never be able to say all lives do matter. All lives matter in every sense of the word as far as I'm concerned, but we also have to remember that there's some that have been left out for so long. And Martin Luther King wrote about it in his book, Why We Can't Wait. Martin Luther King says what we need to do is give black people a sort of GI Bill of Rights. GI Bill of Rights. You know what the GI Bill was designed to do? To make people who are in the military, to help them to be equal with their colleagues who were not in the military. They got behind in many ways, and the same is true with people who are African American and others. Yes.
Can I follow that up with just one more question of a personal nature? What has been your experience with law enforcement?
My experience with law enforcement has been two natures. Number one, when I was a youngster, it was very negative. I had a lot of bad experience. I still get pulled over by the police every week. I don't know how many of you get pulled over every week, but I get pulled over every week in Utah. Now, I was driving down by Liberty Park the other day, for example, and there was a guy, we all stopped at the red light, the police and me and a guy driving I was driving a Volkswagen, and a guy driving a Chevrolet, what's the fast Chevrolet car? Corvette. He was driving a Corvette, and he punched that Corvette and was at the next light before we took off. The police turned his red lights on. I said, "Oh, go get him." And he pulled me over. He pulled me over and said I was doing 35 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. But anyway, so I still get that. Positively, now I work very closely with the police chief in Salt Lake, Chief Brown, and we are working to make sure that the things that happened with George Floyd and the things that happened in Memphis do not happen in Salt Lake City, Utah. Did I see that hand?
You have a glass of water behind you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sure that's for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Not a question, but I just wanted to thank you for your leadership and your goodness and for all that you are. Thank you.
Thank you. My goal, my wife and I made a commitment to do what we could to bring about change in the state of Utah wherever change needed to be brought about. And so that's why we've stayed here. I get opportunities to go other places and to serve other churches and to teach at other. There were 10 of us that were hired in 1972 by the University of Utah, and I'm the only one that stayed. All the rest of us had an opportunity to go someplace else, and I had those opportunities too. But I decided to stay because I saw the need, and we wanted to bring about the change that we could here in Utah. Did I see another hand? Yes, sir.
Quick question. As someone that's seen a lot of changes in your lifetime on these issues, how long do you think it will take for us to finally overcome some of the additional harm that was caused by the Southern strategy in the 70s and 80s that still reverberates today?
How long do I think it's going to take to overcome what some of the Southern strategies have taught us? I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime. I'm hopeful that it will. I didn't think that Mr. Obama would get elected as president of the United States, but he did. And so hopefully it will happen, but I don't think so. I think that we still have so much to overcome, so much that has been built into us, that's ingrained, that we just, we're not interested in bringing about positive change that we need to. So I don't think it'll happen.
Another online question. Our family deals with a lot of representative fatigue. How do you handle it?
Representative of what?
I think that as a family of color, they're having to deal with that, maybe representing their culture all the time as that token family.
One of the values of being a pastor of a church is that you have independence and you are able to say and do a lot of things as a pastor of a church that you can't do otherwise. So for me, working with people of color, working with Native Americans, with Hispanics, African Americans, the legislature, I can go and tell the governor where to jump and how high, and nothing he can do about it. But when you're not a pastor of a church, it's difficult sometimes to be able to know where the line is that separates what has to be from what ought to be. Yes.
Did you go to seminary?
Yes, I went to American Baptist Theological Seminary, I went to Northwest Nazarene Seminary, and I went to, I forgot the third one.
I went to Fuller.
Excuse me?
I went to Fuller.
Oh, you went to Fuller? Okay, I know Fuller. In fact, we sent a young man to Fuller from Boise, Idaho. He went to Fuller, can't remember his name right offhand. But that's one of the things that we do here locally, is that we provide scholarships for people who are of African American or African descent to make sure that they can get into college and seminary. And so we provide those scholarships.
You talked a little bit about the police. My question is more specifically directed at the court system, the judicial system. Do you think the system treats minority people fairly as presently possible?
Do I think that the corrections system treats minorities fairly? If you were to go to the Utah State Prison, about 46% of the population is African American. 46% of the population at the prison is 46%, at the Utah State Prison, is African American. But 2% of the state's population are African American. So fair, is that fair? 46% of the crimes are being committed by African Americans? I don't think so, but people end up caught up in the system. Recently, we did a study about African Americans in the correction system, and the conclusion was we don't have enough statistics to decide whether we are treating them fairly or not. But I think we are not treating African Americans fairly. African Americans get stopped more by the police, they are arrested more, they go to jail more, they are convicted more, and they serve longer sentences in the correction system than do other people.
What do you think we can do to strengthen families?
What can we do to strengthen families?
It starts in the home.
Yeah. The biggest problem that I've ever had in my community was families telling my children that they couldn't walk on certain sides of the street. So we've got to get the older people changing their attitudes so that they will then pass it on to their children. That's what we've got to do to strengthen families. We've got to get the older people changing their attitudes so that they can then tell the children what's better here and then here.
Basically, I want to support that comment. The point is, the basic unit of society is the family. That's where children grow up. That's where they learn from their parents and from other people in the neighborhood. We need to start at home, in our own homes. And make sure our children understand that we're all equal people. We all believe the same. You know, we just need to understand and have fun.
Start at home.
I grew up in Detroit.
Okay? Start at home, and that's then will spread abroad. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How important do you think it is for people of color to be like represented in media for like children to grow up with, like shows and movies?
How long do I think it will be before people of color will be represented in the media? I think.
How important?
Do you think that is for like kids to grow up with?
I'm sorry.
How important it is.
How important it is? It's very important. And you will notice now that the 4 local television stations all have one African American. But you gotta get more than one. You gotta get more than one. It's all right to have one, but then more than one. And I think it's important that we have them in the media, in acting. Last year, I believe, that the Academy Awards decided that they were going to do something about the racial mix that was there, and we've got to do something about that. Yes.
There's another question online. How do you handle racism on an everyday basis when you're confronted with it? How do you handle that?
How do I handle racism on an everyday basis? I confront it. I confront it. When people call me names, I remind them that that 6-letter word that they use to define me is more accurately a definition of them than it is of me. And so I confront racism whenever I have an opportunity to do so. And that's the way I handle it. Yes, sir.
Going along with that, confronting it, what would you say to maybe mainly young people who are just a little more Malcolm-minded, and they're just, they don't want to wait, and they want to take action? How do you, straddle that line between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s approach and Malcolm X's approach? I know they have their differences, but they also have their common goals. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm nonviolent, and I believe that the Malcolm speeches of by any means necessary is not the best approach, that the best approach is to take the nonviolent approach that Dr. King takes. Now, we have a young man in Salt Lake, for example, who participated in the march regarding George Floyd, and he's having a terrible time now finding a job because everybody remembers what he was convicted of during that George Floyd situation. So I say to young people that you have to find a way to support and take care of yourself first, and that's nonviolence. And civil disobedience is a much better way to approach the issue than is the violent way. All right, thank you all for listening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. And I hope and pray that I'll see you again another time.
Just as a heads up, that FBI and Martin Luther King Jr. book is out of print, but we do have a digital copy available on our Hoopla app. If you are not familiar with our Hoopla app, we have flyers at the desk, and all of us are happy to help you access that.